Bienvenidas, bienvenidos. Welcome, everyone. Hello, Hank. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today on this important talk on the rise of executive surveillance. It's an honor to have you here. And before starting, I just want to remind everyone that you can ask your questions on the lower bottom. You can see the chat and the Q&A button. So just please write there, and we'll leave at the end about 10 minutes to answer all of them. So without any further note, the floor is yours, Hank. Thank you.
Awesome, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. I'm glad to be here to chat a little bit about surveillanceware, focusing on executives, really about malware in the mobile world, and helping people understand kind of why we at Lookout think this is so important. So I am going to share up my screen here in a second. There we go. Okay, so let's pop in here. All right. There are a few things I want to go through here. The high level overview of this whole presentation today is really going to be focused on three things. So we're looking at the overall mobile cybersecurity landscape, helping people understand really what that looks like. And I think that as technology professionals, we all understand risks that are out there, but when it comes to mobile, it can get a little more complicated, just because these devices that we rely on so much really they cross that line between personal and work related, and sometimes that sort of blurs the understanding of what risk really is and what risk to whether it's an individual within your company or the entire organization is. So understanding that landscape is really important. And then you're gonna look a little bit inside an attack. What does it really look like? What's the process? And then we're going to talk about malware as a service, which we'll touch on the surveillanceware side of it. There are a few good examples, happening out in the world these days that we can focus on. So let's roll on through here. So like I said, with this landscape, what trends are pushing us towards mobile? I mean, obviously it's an important part of everyone's life. We all have at least one phone in our pocket. But really, what are the challenges and what are the rates at which people actually encounter mobile attacks? So we'll look into some of that here as well. So mobile work really, it is no longer a nice to have. And excuse me, I'm going to clear my throat here first. All right. So it's no longer a nice to have. It's really a necessity, right? So even before everyone was working remotely, it was necessary to be able to enable your employees to work from a device of their choosing in order to keep up productivity. And the interesting thing is that obviously the pandemic and everything, it was sort of accelerated this process, but now it's really here to stay. So you look at some of these numbers and you look at, 74% of CFOs plan to permanently shift employees to remote work after the end of COVID-19 and once we're all back to normal. And I think that at this point, this is something where people say, well, yeah, of course, but 74% is a pretty significant number, especially across all industries. I think that there are certain industries, like in technology, where people are saying, well, you have the flexibility to work remote, do whatever you want. But then there are also plenty of industries like maybe like banking or healthcare or retail, where it's necessary for people to be in the office, on site. So when you look at the 74% number, that's pretty significant considering how many industries may require people to actually be in the office. It shows you how many will give people the flexibility of being remote. And then also this last number, the 71% saying that mobile devices are very critical to their business. That's important because it shows you how, it's not just, hey, I'm going to give you this work phone, or I'm going to let you work from a phone or use it for work just to make sure that I can call you when I need you, or maybe you can access some documents when you need them. It's really critical to the ongoing business continuity as people are continuing to work remotely. So there we go. All right. So this is also one of the biggest challenges that we see here at Lookout. And, one thing that I really enjoy about being here and honestly being in this type of security at a company like this is that, we really have a great data set to work with. We have a great customer base and also security intelligence data set that we can understand the trends and the thought processes of our customers and kind of pair that with this massive threat intelligence team and really be developing things for people's needs. So when we see challenges like this, we can really take action on it and help people out. So this is one that we hear all the time, right? Freedom that doesn't sacrifice security. And I think that's really particularly important with mobile devices to understand that line between security and privacy and making sure that you can protect your organization without stepping over that line and saying, either I know too much about my employees, or this could be a compliance violation, or even more so, your employees feel like they're kind of being watched. So they never end up actually activating the software on their device, or, they say, well, for whatever reason, they don't really buy into it. So towing that line of privacy, productivity, and security is really important. And it's something we definitely prioritize here. And as you look at these numbers, I mean, it's pretty shocking. 97% of these leaders consider remote workers to be more at risk than office workers. And I think this really speaks to the loss of the traditional corporate perimeter that we're all used to being protected by. People went from, it's been said, a number of times now over the last year and a half, you went from having maybe a handful of offices, you had maybe, let's say 12 locations, worldwide, to now having thousands of them. So you now have to think about the risk that kind of extrapolates out from that, and understanding that, within that, 40% of these people are saying mobile devices are the biggest IT security threat. Again, think about the number of vectors that an attacker can come in on. For someone to say that, for 40% of people to say that that's the biggest one, that mobile is the biggest one, shows you how important it is to them. And the issue there, again, is this challenge of visibility and protection without violating the end user privacy. So you want to make sure that you're enabling people to be productive from these devices without kind of crossing that line that we're talking about. So this is some data that I pulled just a couple months ago, and this shows, actually looks like I forgot to update the title of the slide, so there you go. But this is basically global encounter rates with mobile threats. So on the left, you see the trend starting as early as looks like October 2018, and this is up until July. So this could probably use a refresh, but it shows you that it's a consistent, upward trend. It's something where, this is an ongoing issue. And again, we're working this, we've secured over 200 million mobile devices at this point. Looking at this type of data and with that type of data set really is indicative of global trends. The interesting thing here is that you look on the right-hand side at this table and you look at how things are broken up between Android and iOS and each kind of level here, right? So mobile phishing, which we'll talk about, a little more in depth shortly, really is the biggest issue, especially when it comes to targeting executives. Some people refer to it as, they call it spear phishing, really focusing in on particular individuals to steal, whether it's login credentials, gain access to their device, use them as kind of an entryway into the rest of the infrastructure. We'll talk about some of the challenges there. But as you look down this list, it's interesting to see that phishing is obviously the biggest issue, but there's still a significant number of devices and individuals that are encountering these risks. And, this is, you look at 12%, 16% across that entire user base, that's a significant number of people who are encountering these attacks. And if you think about it, even if you only have, let's say you have 100 employees, I mean, that's over the course of 3 months of one quarter, you have almost, you have 12 or almost 20 of them getting attacked by a mobile phishing link. On top of that, you have, 6 of them who are operating on out-of-date operating systems or ones with known vulnerabilities, which is another way that attackers exploit devices. 6% of them on Android have malicious apps in there. That's another thing we'll talk about. It's just interesting to see how this all breaks down and how this really is, a challenge across the board with these encounter rates. So why do people target executives? You have to think about, there are a couple of things here. This is really strong opportunity for attackers to socially engineer individuals. And also, if they are able to successfully, let's say they're able to successfully phish an executive, get their login credentials. We'll talk about kind of this last bullet here where they get broad access to sensitive and valuable data by using those credentials. But at the same time, they can then use that, basically that persona, to target other individuals within the company, right? Maybe they want to, they phish the CFO, are able to pose as him in an email out to, let's say, the head of engineering, saying, hey, I need you to complete this PO for, this tool that you want to use. Here's a link to the form to use, and ends up being a phishing link. Now that's kind of something I came up with off the top of my head, but that type of attack chain is very realistic. The other thing, obviously, is that as travel is coming back, that makes them more vulnerable as well, especially as they rely so heavily on their devices to be productive, from elsewhere. Especially a lot of them have tablets and slightly more powerful devices there, other than just smartphones. So to give you an idea of what kind of the typical mobile exploit chain really looks like, it goes a few ways. So it always starts with phishing. I mean, this is the thing, is that these days it's no longer people trying to brute force their way into whether it's a phone or even a server or a cloud service, whatever it may be. that no longer really happens. I mean, it happens, but not to the degree that it used to be, because phishing has become so effective and such a broadly used tool that the attackers understand that they can discreetly enter infrastructure. They can quietly steal someone's login credentials without them ever even knowing, and basically do it in a far sneakier fashion, and maybe have a much lower chance of setting off some of those alarm bells that you have in place when they log in with legitimate credentials. And if you don't have kind of a more modern solution in place, it's not going to let you as the IT or security person know that there's unauthorized access going on. So phishing really is the way that things start. Then, it's about gaining access, right? And when it comes to surveillanceware on executives, that usually happens by exploiting some sort of vulnerability on the device. We all saw recently that, it seems like most every iOS update recently has come with, an emergency patch for some security related thing. I do not blame Apple at all. It's impossible to ship perfect code. But it's been particularly kind of noteworthy in the news recently because, there was one a couple versions ago that was an exploitable vulnerability that was being used to deliver Pegasus devices. Now, Pegasus, we all know, is a mobile surveillanceware, but it's just one example of a lot of different types of malware and surveillanceware that can be used, to target individuals or to survey individuals. So really, it's gaining access comes through that exploitation, and then once they're able to do that, they're elevating privileges. They're going in and maybe getting root access on the device, becoming the administrator, being able to see everything that's going on. And then from there, really perform the espionage side of it, right? They're sending and exfiltrating data. They're listening in on audio. They're using the camera to see whatever this person's seeing. And then most importantly, honestly, they're stealing credentials, because once they have those executive credentials, odds are someone in the C-suite probably has pretty unbridled access to most everything across the entire infrastructure. So you take those credentials, you turn around to your laptop, you go and try to log into, any number of widely used corporate apps, let's say Microsoft Office 365 or Salesforce or AWS or something like that. And you may, you may hit there as the attacker, and you may be able to, get into those cloud services. And now it's not just the mobile device that's compromised, but the entire infrastructure. That's kind of a whole other conversation around cloud access and understanding that and securing that process. But it shows you how the mobile device can really be an entryway into the rest of the infrastructure. So how many ways can you be phished? So mobile devices, really have a broad number of ways that attackers can target an individual, and especially when social engineering is at play. So, this is the way it used to be, right? This is where the attacker up top, they would say, okay, I'm going to send an email to, john.smith at xyz.com. Hopefully it gets through, the corporate firewall, the secure gateway, the endpoint antivirus on the laptop or on the desktop, and then it reaches the exec, and maybe they'll open it, maybe they'll click the link, hope so. What things have turned to now is that there's so many different applications on mobile devices, especially if people allow individuals to use personal devices and kind of the bring your own device or BYOD model, that you can use any number of vectors. And this is, it's SMS, it's iMessage, it's email, but it's also third-party messaging apps, it's social media platforms, it's gaming apps. Honestly, it's even dating apps are presenting a way for attackers to phish people. It sounds silly, but we actually we discovered a few years ago a campaign that was targeting members of the Israeli Defense Force, and the attacker was posing as a young, attractive woman, reaching out to soldiers on social media platforms, saying, hey, I want to talk to you, but let's talk on this app, and would send them a link to a malicious application, which they then downloaded, and then it delivered surveillanceware to the device. So it is realistic that these things happen across all of these platforms. And it's so important to have mobile phishing protection on these devices, whether it's an executive, whether, it could be any individual, because one compromised device, with the example earlier of being able to take those credentials and really use it as the backdoor into the rest of the organization, is a really critical spot right now. And it's honestly kind of a blind spot for a lot of different organizations. So these are two examples from over in France earlier this year. These are fake government tax pages. They look pretty convincing to me. I've actually got some family over in France, and I asked them, I said, hey, do these look legit to you? And they were like, honestly, they said that is almost exactly what I would expect to see. So, the attackers are getting better. We'll go through a couple examples in a minute here about really the effectiveness of these types of campaigns. So the other thing to understand here, and these are a couple screenshots from our admin console where you can see this is an older version of Evernote. They've obviously updated it since then. But this is an older version of Evernote, which is, we all use it as kind of a note-taking app. You can use it on your phone, you can use it across, it's great. It's a great cloud-based app to have. It's interesting because it's a legitimate application. There is nothing that Evernote is doing to try to target you with anything. But so from a personal standpoint, you may sit there and be like, you know what? It's fine. Like, I want them to have access to my clipboard. I want them to be able to access the camera so that I can take a picture of some notes that I hand wrote. And then I think it has the technology to transcribe that into digital notes. That's fine. But from a corporate perspective, that risk could end up being something that puts you in violation of some sort of compliance standard. You look here at the map on the right. This is where all of the IPs behind the app are located. So obviously you have China in there. That's risky in itself. And you just kind of have to understand your own corporate risk tolerance and where you really want to be able to, or where you need to be able to control how data is flowing from applications, even if they're perfectly legitimate, and how that affects kind of your overall security posture. So this is an example of a risky application. We give, in the console, you can see there's a risk grade of a D. We do, classic grading system with A, B, C, D, F. And, we really, this is something we want people to know, like, hey, just so you know, there is high risk with this particular application. You may want to take a look and maybe do a little bit of version control and make sure people are updated to a later version that has solved for many of these issues. So malware as a service. So this is an interesting thing to talk about. So we're all familiar with software as a service, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, pretty much everything, it seems, as a service these days. Malware as a service is something that's really evolved in the last few years into something that can make even honestly very, very unsophisticated cyber attackers. Like if I decide that all of a sudden I want to go to the dark side and I'm sitting there on day one, the first thing I do is probably go buy some malware as a service kit. And the fact is they're pretty easy to find. So this is a screen. These are a few screenshots that I had a member of our security intel team pull right off the dark web. And as you can see, you can get, let's see here. So we've got, a phishing kit, hack any password, Apple scam page for phishing, complete PayPal scamming. I mean, even look at this, it's $50 for a PayPal phishing and cashing out pack, whatever that means. But I assume that means the phishing campaign itself, and then the actual ability to maybe through crypto or something like that, be able to actually cash out on that. And even less, $19 USD down here. It's pretty unbelievable, how accessible this is and how easy it is. Honestly, you can download one of these and all of a sudden you have you have access to be able to basically reskin one of these and send it out to whoever you want. And these are obviously examples. These are more kind of financially motivated examples. You can see on the product description down here, a lot of these are, you have Wells Fargo, you have Capital One, but you also see, there is, Apple iCloud login, what else? Microsoft Office 365, Adobe PDF sharing. That would be one that you probably use pretty heavily against execs. These are all examples of how these are all pages that will be generated. This kit comes with links to these pages, these fake pages, and you can use phishing for anything. I mean, that's kind of the scary thing here to me, is that, in our research, we actually see that there are more malicious links that are delivered to mobile devices that actually want to deliver malware to the device than those that want to just steal credentials. And there's still, it's pretty heavy on both sides. The total actually adds up usually to over 100%, which means there are plenty of sites that are used for both. But it's just interesting to think, we think of phishing as, I'm going to come in and steal your credentials. Then I'm going to, go through the exploit chain that I explained earlier, which is still perfectly legitimate. But there are a lot of people that are looking to really deliver malware to the device, really, execute surveillance on the device, be able to do more than just, a one hit, I'm going to steal your bank account information, steal some money, but really that kind of longer burn surveillance on the device. So this is a real world use case that Lookout discovered back in 2018. And it's called Bankamar Stealer. So this is a mobile specific Trojan that is delivered via SMS that then prompts the user to download a custom app. And as you can see here, this one is also financially motivated. These screenshots here are of the actual malware in the wild that we were able to stop and take down. But the interesting thing about Bankamar Stealer is that it continues to evolve and it continues to be used. So you can see in this last bullet I have here, originally we observed 7,700 instances, observed samples of the malware out in the wild in 2018. And I actually just this morning had one of our researchers run the number again, and we're at 130,000 just 3 years later. And the great thing is that, look, we protect our users against this, and we're very happy to have that out there. But it really shows you how one piece of mobile malware is not just going to be around for a little bit and then disappear. And the same thing goes for surveillanceware. Again, we see it with Pegasus constantly evolving. That's why it keeps coming up in the news. So you can see that this is the perfect example of that exploit chain where it's delivered by a phishing. The user is prompted to download a custom application or is sent to one of these fake login pages, and then the payload is delivered. And you can see that there are pretty significant capabilities in these bullets. They can control the device. They can silently call attacker specified numbers. That's sort of an interesting one. They can then turn around and use this individual's contact list to spread the malware even further. And if you're thinking about this in the executive mindset, there are probably some pretty important people on that, in that address book that an attacker would be very happy to continue phishing on this kind of attack chain. From a privacy standpoint, retrieving and intercepting all SMS messages back and forth. And then finally, they can execute additional malware payloads on the device, continue to target, and use it as kind of a constant form of surveillance. So just to go through kind of the key takeaways here, because I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. It looks like we have a few that have come in. We have to understand that mobile devices really have enabled productivity, but at the risk of additional threats. So it's something we need to do. And it's tough because we trust these devices. We inherently trust our smartphones and our tablets to act in our best interest because they're so personal to us. Even ones that are issued to us from work. It's still like this thing is, it's by my side. It is, it's next to me when I sleep. It's there when I wake up. It's like the most, it's the most, it's the closest thing to you on a pretty consistent basis. And you have to just understand that attackers know that, and what they're doing is they're trying to exploit that trust to get you to not think about the risk that may be involved with certain things. And when it comes to social engineering and phishing and delivering surveillanceware, that's exactly what they're going to do, is that they're going to have you trust them because they're coming to you from a very legitimate looking profile on LinkedIn or on Instagram or whatever it may be, or a perfectly legitimate looking email. And they know that, you have a harder time seeing some of those red flags on mobile devices. There's smaller screens, there's simplified user interfaces, and that's all great, but it hides some of those giveaways. And that can really be a place where even, honestly, even the most seasoned security professionals can sometimes slip up. So really, when it comes down to it, it's important to understand that the execs are being heavily targeted because of the amount of data access they have, and the fact that the mobile exploit chain really integrates this full spectrum of mobile risk between phishing, credential theft, malware delivery, and exploiting vulnerabilities, where malware as a service is only making this more difficult for security teams. So I hope this is informative. I think we have some time for some Q&A, I believe.
Yes, we do. And we do have a lot of questions. So
Right.
Thank you, Hank, for this incredible presentation. I think all of us find it really useful. And we are going to start with some of the questions. So here we have the first one. Employees should be educated about how to alert and recognize this scheme. How can you educate them?
That's a great question. That's actually one that we get. We do get that a fair amount. So, I mean, number one is, there are some great platforms out there, that deliver, that deliver corporate phishing training. I know the guy who was CISO at KnowBe4, which is a platform. I'm not plugging them, but they're just a good example of not at all. But I know that there are lots of platforms like that. But the tough thing, and I think this is really what the question's about, is, how do you educate people on the things outside of, kind of the more traditional, like corporate email and all that? I think at this point, a lot of us do understand the red flags on the corporate email side. I would say that it's really just about repetition to your employees, and really making sure that, maybe setting a requirement that if they want to be able to use a personal device for work, they have to pass, a level of phishing training. It's really up to you. And I would say that, showing people what these look like, what these attacks look like, and more so that they understand that it looks like a perfectly legitimate piece of communication. It could just be, hey, someone tried to log into your bank account, click here.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand that you take that extra step, help them understand, then you take that extra second and really look at it and say, is this how my bank usually communicates with me? You see it all the time with things like people use, the IRS, hey, your tax forms are messed up. You got to contact us now. The IRS only ever contacts people by mail. And so it's one of these things that you think about it. And if there is a red flag, if there's something where in your gut, you say something seems a little bit off about this, odds are it probably is. And the best thing to do is to contact the communication, the people who sent the communication, and say, hey, is this actually legit? Call the real people, and see if it's something that they sent out.
Yes, actually, last week we had a model on cybersecurity in the financial sector, and they were discussing this, how cybercrime is now using, as you showed, very similar and very realistic, almost kind of websites, even phone calls that make you think it's real. It's your bank. They copied all of the way they talk, the way they ask the questions. So yes. So I think related to that, we have some questions here asking, other than phishing awareness, what other measures can you do to keep your business secure?
So, phishing is obviously important, but the number one thing is to think about every device that has access to any sort of corporate data on an equal playing field. I think that in the past, I've been at Lookout now for 3 years, and seeing how the need for mobile security has evolved, and it's really because people are recognizing that these devices have just as much access to corporate data as anything else does. Yeah. Now, I'd say from kind of an overarching perspective, is the best thing to do is recognize the gaps that may exist and then work to fill those. And it's not, look, these days, there are a lot of people talking about zero trust, which is a very important thing. But in my honest opinion, it's sort of become, zero trust has sort of become a buzzword. It's become it's sort of lost its real meaning. And for that reason, a lot of people, who are trying to implement more zero trust practices feel like it's incredibly overwhelming, and they're sitting there and they're looking at this journey they have to take, and they're like, oh my God, I have to institute every piece of zero trust philosophy across my entire infrastructure. Where do I start? What do I do? And I think that, when it comes to identifying the need and the gaps, it's about thinking about your own corporate risk profile. What's important to you? Is it securing users who are traveling? Is it compliance? Is it, making sure that platforms like Salesforce or Google Workspace or, SAP SuccessFactors are fully locked down before maybe focusing on some of the more fringe use cases, like, the Evernote example I use, maybe super important to one organization, but not another. So it's all about understanding what your own priorities are, and then really making sure that you're looking at every endpoint end user on the same playing field in terms of the risk that they may present, either intentionally or unintentionally, to the data.
Hank, and this also applies to small businesses, right? Because I know we have some people here that don't necessarily have a security team, or they're starting they're starting with their business, and they cannot give their employees another device just for work related affairs. So in that case, for small businesses, what would be the main recommendations?
That's a good question. I would say the main recommendation for a small business would be, you're probably using a lot of platforms that are delivered to you as a service. I kind of joked about all the software as a service and platform, all that stuff, but it really has helped enable, especially small businesses, really get things started. And I think that the most important thing is to understand how any applications or platforms that you're using as you're getting started, how they access your data. What are they doing? How can they, what are you giving permission for? And again, thinking about that risk tolerance, what are you okay sharing? Because a lot of times these risks evolve out of a third party that's actually, you've integrated them, and they are, it's not you that gets compromised, it's the third party, and your data is part of that. So I think that it's important to, especially as you're getting started and starting to leverage more of these service-based platforms, is just really making sure that you understand exactly where your data is going and who can access it, and then what you can do to make sure that, as you grow, you can basically insert repeatable practices that will help secure kind of that data flow between your users, your devices, and anything integrated with, maybe some of your cloud services.
And we have very interesting question here also as developers. They say, as a developer, what is the best course of action when a vulnerability is detected? And I think this is, I guess, for cell phone apps and all the mobile apps we have that can be used also for work. So in that case, even within the company, all the developers, what could they do?
So I'm going to answer this in two ways, because I want to make sure I get, because the first is, if you're the one developing the app and you identify a vulnerability in your own software, the most important thing to do is disclose it as quickly as possible and push out a patch for it. And that's the beauty of cloud-based software these days, right? You can do that. You can send out a patch, as soon as it's fixed, or as soon as there's a fix for it, and basically protect, kind of get your user base protected again. But if you're thinking about it from, you're on a team, and internally you realize that your users are using an app with a vulnerability, that's really, it's tough, because you have to rely on the developer again to push that out. But I think it's, again, important to make people aware of it. If you use a particular application across the board, and you see a notification, there's a new CVE, or common vulnerability and exposure, noted for it, It's to let people know. It's to make people aware of it, because attackers often use those vulnerabilities as their way in. And again, it's usually through some sort of exploit delivered through a malicious link or a zero-click piece of surveillanceware.
Yeah, and so moving on to once you're infected, we have a couple of questions here. One of them is, can this mobile malware infect the automatic cloud backups our devices do?
That's a great question. Honestly, that would be a better question for one of our researchers who kind of lives in this every day. I would suspect that just thinking about, so I would say that most of the malware that I see come across the board and that I read about, I don't think that's a capability, because they rely on, the malware. It's like a parasite. It relies on being on the device to execute its surveillance. So I don't think it goes so far as infecting cloud backups. That being said, there is plenty that I don't see, and plenty that we automatically protect our users against, and I may just not have, just because of the nature of my job, I'm not in the research console every day. So I can, if whoever asked that, they want to follow up with me on that, if they're really curious, I can get a more well-rounded answer from one of our researchers.
Yeah, and I guess just last week, someone mentioned that when we were talking about cybersecurity, we should just behave like we do now with this pandemic and just assume everyone's contagious. So every app, every email, everything's contagious.
Yeah.
And just try to be as careful as possible, right? So that can also help on the answer of this one. And another question is, if your device is infected, should you just reset it to factory settings? Does that fix it?
That's a great question. Usually, yes. Usually you can do that. But the thing is that you may not, the whole kind of point is that the attackers are getting a lot better at being discreet. Like you likely don't know that the device is infected. And there are definitely, there's mobile adware out there that all of a sudden your phone's popping up with all these ads in some app that you downloaded from the Google Play Store or whatever it may be. And you know what, that's sure. I reset that. That's one that's pretty obvious. But when you're talking about things like advanced surveillanceware and obviously the nature of this talk today is surveillanceware targeting execs, the last couple of versions of Pegasus have been zero click. This is becoming a much more realistic tactic that attackers are using, where they're able to, as long as there's interaction between the device and the delivery of the malware, they're able to deliver that to the device and silently add it, basically download it in the background. And that's, even the first versions of Pegasus that we saw that were one click. So you did actually have to tap a link, because Lookout discovered Pegasus back in 2016 with the Citizen Lab up in Toronto. And what we saw was that even then, it just looked like Safari crashed. Like that happens all the time, right? It's sometimes your internet gets caught up and you just kind of close the app and whatever, you're on your merry way. So that's how it started. And that was 5 years ago. And it's evolved since then. And this idea of zero click, where with all the background refresh that our phones do, there's so much connection, to the internet and automatic previewing and things like that. Those are ways that they get in. It's honestly pretty scary.
Yes, it is. And we do have a question here asking how does Pegasus works, but I think it's part of this evolution you're talking about, right? That now it's a zero click. It's not like a phishing campaign on itself anymore.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's still delivered with that same exploit chain. And again, this is a question where I've actually got, I think we're going to put it out on our site soon, but I did a webinar recently with a branch of the FBI, where I went in with one of our iOS specific researchers at Lookout. And he dissected how he went into the innards of it. So to whoever asked that question, keep an eye, because I know we're going to be putting that out soon. That'll give you some really good insight, and I wouldn't want to misquote that. So yeah, there's plenty of it on our site though.
Yes, we'll wait for that.
Yeah.
We'll be waiting for that. And also, our audience is interested in knowing what examples of bug have you identified in LATAM, other than Pegasus or any other trends you've seen in LATAM.
Yeah, so one that I've seen that actually started in Europe last year and has now moved basically across the pond over to our side of the world, is this one called Flubot. It is a mobile malware as a service, and it started as one that used fake delivery notifications as the hook, and then it actually more recently has been seen saying, oh, your photos have been uploaded to this, to this site, click here. And again, we kind of like you half smile, almost chuckle a little bit, but like it works. Like there's a reason that the attackers use things like that, because it works, because we're so programmed to just see something like that and just boom, tap the link. And I use that as one example because it's been pretty well talked about. But the fact is that these trends are global. It's very rarely do we really see something that's very, very regionally focused. I think the last one that I really saw that was super regional was it was almost 2 years ago now. There was someone who was running a phishing campaign targeting customers of Canadian banks. Okay. But aside from that, it's all so transactional these days that using these tactics and delivering them to anyone is really, I mean, it's people just, they go where they think they can get the money or the data or whatever it may be. So,
yeah. And we also would like to ask, does this type of attacks require multi-layer defenses?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, they do. I think that this is all part of kind of the greater security strategy, right? And thinking about what that path for that your users take to get to data is. So, it starts on an endpoint, and whether that's a mobile device, a smartphone or a tablet, or it's a traditional endpoint in a laptop or a desktop. There are solutions there, but then you have to think about the actual access to the data, right? Whether it's cloud-based data or on premise or in a private application, you also need something that's going to be able to monitor user activity and device risk scores to be able to ensure that no compromised user devices are accessing that data from any device. So the kind of the key, the real winner is if you get something where it's able to use context from the endpoint security tool to inform the cloud or on-prem security tool, and really be able to make that into basically kind of a continuous assessment of risk of those users and devices, so that they can, so that again, no unauthorized access is granted. And so, it is multi-layer in that sense. Obviously, the full scope of multi-layer goes much deeper than that, but kind of in the scope of how Lookout helps out its customers, that's how we look at it. And I think that it's just important to know that each of those things exist, and if you can get them delivered as one platform, that's kind of that's the crown jewel of it all. So definitely multifaceted, and part of that kind of greater multi-layered defense and depth strategy.
Right. So going back to the executive board and all the executives, which is what this talk was about, they're asking, how does the executive board can protect themselves from CEO fraud? How can they educate their employees?
Okay, that's a good question. I would say, so one thing that I've seen a lot is that, and this is no comment on anyone who's an executive, but a lot of times executives kind of feel like they're not going to be targeted. That's actually when we bring on a new customer, for example. I've spoke to some of our kind of market facing folks. They say, a lot of times it's actually, the security minded execs understand it, but a CFO is saying, well, why would I be targeted by this? I've got more important things to deal with, and so I think that it's really helping them understand how critical their access is to everything, and how attackers want to take advantage of that in order to gain access to all the data that they may have.
Yes. And I think related to that, we can link that this question with it is the email for a regular person can compromise a whole organization. Is lateral movement the goal?
Yes, that is a great, actually, lateral movement is this person has clearly done some reading. So yes, usually lateral movement is the goal. There's kind of a point of entry, but very rarely is that point of entry the end goal. So it's sort of what I was talking about before, where the idea is to, is to either install malware or swipe credentials to then be able to go to other services where you may be able to get into the infrastructure and maybe encrypt data for a ransomware attack, or exfiltrate data and then basically hold it while it's not traditional ransom, basically hold it for ransom outside the infrastructure. So two little nuances there, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely lateral movement is almost always the case, and being able to understand how your users usually behave, having that baseline, and then being alerted as to whether they are starting to access more or different data than they usually do is a really important part of preventing those lateral movement attacks.
Yes. And someone else is asking if ensuring the settings, the employees' computers are enabled to allow full email extensions to view, will that be helpful? So I think, yes, he's just asking if the full email extensions, the permits for it to be viewed, will that help control these kind of threats?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm not a pro at email security specifically, but I think enabling any security settings that come by default is a really good way to start. And then then having additional kind of safety nets in there is a good thing as well.
Well, Hank, thank you very much. I think the rest of the questions were covered with all of the others and the answers. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for this incredible presentation. And thank you to all of the audience that joined us today. So thank you very much, Hank.
Absolutely. It's been a real pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for joining. If you have any other questions, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter and all that stuff. So definitely shoot me a note.
Exactly. On legitimate social media.
Yes, legit, very legit. I'm not at the point, I'm not important enough to have fake profiles made of myself yet. So, once I get to that point, we'll know we've made it.
Exactly. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you. See ya.
Bye.